welcome to the Uncivilized Books and Escape Pod webinar on Ex Libris, Matt Madden's Ex Libris. And our host today will be Menachem, am I pronouncing this correctly?
Better than I can do yours.
From Escape Pod, and then also Matt, I think you said you were going to read a short piece, and I believe we're also live on Facebook. So thank you everyone for coming, and I will hand this off to Matt, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, maybe Menachem and I, you and I can chat for a minute here. A few more people in, and maybe set up the book a little bit before I do a little reading. What do you think about that?
All right. Yeah. Let's get the audience comfortable before we play your clip.
There we go.
So I guess we're hosting. I'll introduce. We're here in my mind to celebrate Matt Madden's astounding new work, Ex Libris, which came out just last week officially.
Officially November 23rd. Yeah, but it's been trickling into stores for a few weeks now. Yeah.
As has everything been.
Right.
It is the normal release pattern for books nowadays. Ex Libris is a book so simplistically complex, so metatextually pure that I had to go read what inspired it like days after finishing the book. So I read the Calvino novel.
If on a winter's night, a traveler.
If on a winter's night, a traveler that you mentioned on the back, and that you mentioned. Yeah. And in my opinion, again, I'm incredibly biased. I love comics. This is really a much purer experience when it comes to a metatextual or a invited reader. You're given a forced perspective in the beginning of this book where you're behind, the POV of the character. Just gonna give everyone the first page.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that really, Calvino, I don't want to say struggles because he does it effortlessly at times. You're very aware that he is making a metatextual book. He's got this reader, this dimension. And in the comic, you just know this is what you're seeing.
Right. The narration makes it more kind of in your face sometimes, like calling attention to the tropes, I guess.
Right. And I think that comics really allow you shared, this is to me, the reason I came to this because I wanted to get to this tweet. You shared a tweet where someone said, no other medium has as much fun.
Yeah, I'm looking for that. I'm looking for it right now. Yeah, because that was a great comment.
And it made me think, and I realized it's because no other medium can really deconstruct itself as simply as comics can.
Yeah, I think it lends itself to that kind of play. And I'm not sure why, if it's because there's always a dialogue going on between images and text, and maybe from panels and panels, like, back to at least Winsor McCay and like Little Sammy Sneeze and Dream of a Rarebit Fiend. You see these things of characters talking to each other across panels. And I wonder if it isn't something about that basic page grid layout of panels that creates little windows that makes you want to break the rules of linear storytelling and have fun with that,
Right. And which is again, something that makes this book so fun is that you're doing multiple fun things like that. You're using paneling to do fun things, but you're also using storytelling and things that would work in any medium to keep the narrative moving, to keep the meta point on point, and it's still fun. Whereas if I was watching a movie that was trying to do this, it would be belabored at this minute,
Yeah, well, I think it always depends. I mean, to me, that's a challenge of something like doing something very experimental in one way or another is, part of pulling it off is making it not not necessarily palatable, because I'm not necessarily, I mean, my stuff is not, you can have more confrontational avant-garde art, and that's not really my mode, but I'm dealing with pretty serious ideas about, storytelling and how narrative works and the relationship between fact and fiction, but I'm also having fun with it. And that's how I experience it. And that's how I like to share it. I'm still trying to find this one quote. Oh, here, this was, who said this? I want to give credit. Well, at Van der Zwan at viz.social. So I don't know, someone in Netherlands looks like. Hadn't read my book, I should point out, but someone read a description that someone else is talking about Ex Libris and just remarked, why don't other media ever seem to have as much fun deconstructing themselves as comics do? Also, I need to get this.
Also, I need to get this, which we hope.
Which you hope you will.
Yeah. Well, see, that's one of the things that I also think is so fascinating. You were talking about the play between the panels, but there's also obviously the play between the creator and the reader is much more direct in comics than any of the other mediums that we're talking about. Calvino leaves things out and then starts mentioning that he's left these things out. Mm-hmm. The second he draws attention to it, he's giving us commentary on his writing.
Right.
Whereas in a comic, when you want to draw attention to the bookcase suddenly being there,
right,
you're not making commentary on like through the room. You're just doing that thing where something suddenly appears.
Yeah.
In the story.
You just draw it in the panel.
And you just draw it in the panel, and that's because, to me, that's because comics allow for that, where we don't have to explain it to you. It's just there. Comics allow for instantaneous. So you get to have so many things at once that just work. That again, I can't imagine other mediums being able to do it without it being seeing the wires a lot.
Right. This is, although I like seeing the wires, I should say at the same point. It's more about like how it becomes part of the organic whole and effect of the work, maybe. So like here's something tangential, although maybe not so tangential, which is that Jessica Abel, my wife, who people might know is also a cartoonist and so on. And for a while, a couple years ago, well, many years ago now, probably 10 years ago, she was working on a YA novel, and it never panned out for a number of reasons. But one thing that really frustrated her early on, switching from writing comics to writing prose, and especially like her comics, if you've read them, they're very dialogue heavy. She really likes to get into characters and their interactions and stuff. And when you're doing comics, you can have pages of dialogue, and you kind of flip right through it because you've got the balloons and you got people's gestures and looking at each other. And so she finds herself trying to write just standard prose. And she got so frustrated by having to say, he said, she said, he looked back at her quizzically, and like all this kind of like,
descriptive, right?
Artificial stuff that we do in prose and don't think about it. Whereas in comics, people comment on, Will Eisner has called a word balloon a desperation device. But to me, it's very organic to have the words floating in the air, just like, our sound floats in the air when we talk, that seems like the same amount of artificiality, if not less so, than having to have end quote, comma,
Well, right. Said, and that's, if we were going to go back to Lynn Ward, right. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have silent panels that are just so expressive and emotive, or an occasional panel or description on the bottom of that, you're limited to what you're going to do. It's also going to limit things immensely. I remember, I'm sure you read, but actually I shouldn't say sure, the original, the Who Censored Roger Rabbit book?
No, I've not read that.
So the original, they're comic strip characters. Mm-hmm. Like Dick Tracy is a major character in it, and they actually have word balloons. You have to, like, while you hear them talk.
Oh, really? Okay.
In front, and it's a whole thing that runs through, and it actually gets tedious reading it. You're like, I don't need to keep hearing you, but they're like, no, we don't remind you, these are comic
right. Right.
And it's one of those things. It's one of those things that doing it in a book, it becomes tedious. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I feel that that's one of the real joy. This book is scary to people. I have pitched this book, and people are like, because you can tell that they're like, well, am I ready for it?
Right.
Will I be able to handle it? And it's like, no, look, this isn't Strange Death of Alex Raymond, or what was the other one that came out this year that was that level of detail, though much less insane? Red Rock, Baby Mountain. This isn't a Black Diamond comic. this is very accessible. And
Yeah.
you're like, oh. And then they're like, then they doubt that it could be as complex as I said it is.
Right.
And I think
right.
it's really, it's great about it is how accessible it is. And you could teach a few courses on the things you do in this book. You have to see where you got them from and show them. But like,
right.
This, you use so many techniques in both style, but also storytelling, but also graphic story. I mean, again, you literally wrote 2 books on it with Jessica. So
right.
Shocking.
Drawing words and writing pictures and Mastering
words,
Comics are 2 textbooks we did. Yeah.
You know, and it's you can see that you have this well in him. It's also not, it's not Red Rock Baby Mountain where you know you're constantly being drawn to how complex it is, because it's such a simple and easy read.
Yeah, I think I like a kind of straightforward approach to sophisticated ideas, I guess, and to just put stuff in a straightforward way, and not necessarily call attention to the fact like you are entering a very deep work of art. The spiral is as much the outer limits as it is you're entering the world of Borges's labyrinths or whatever. But the fact is it's both. That's both those things are in my cultural heritage. And if I lead with Calvino, because that's the obvious reference and it's a great conversation starter, and it's definitely helped me a lot, I feel like, in making the book catch the attention of people outside the usual indie comics sphere. It's very much a comic book about comics primarily. Like I have a lot of literary influences, and there are a lot of little hidden, or not so hidden references to the worlds of literature that influence me. But but really the biggest aspect is comics and the world of comics and how they work and how you can jump from one visual world to another. So on that note, maybe that's a good segue to the introduction to the book. For those of you, if you've not seen the book, this is it, Ex Libris, a comic. So again, with this whole book and literature thing, like I've always liked to call myself comic books, and like any cartoonist from a YA to superhero to underground artist, any interview they're going to ask you what you think about the term graphic novel. It's one of those eternal questions. So, and I call it a graphic novel in the publicity, but it's a comic book. So I'm just going to read you one little sequence from the 2nd chapter. And to set it up, I'll just say that at this point in the book, we've met this character who's a narrator in the voiceover, and we're seeing the story through their eyes, and they're locked in this room and there's nothing in there but a bookshelf, and they're starting to pull books off the shelf and realize they're all comics, and they're starting to explore these comic books, not being really someone who reads comics, trying to figure out if they're any good, who put them there, what they're there for, if they're trying to, share any secret messages eventually and things like that. So at this point in the book, they've only read a few stories and they're kind of trying to figure out, they're realizing they don't really understand comics and how they work. So they're looking for some insight. And this is the page 34. So, into the book here. And you'll notice the top few pages, and Malcolm, you've promised you're going to ask me about the color blue later on. We can get back to that if you want to. But so this sort of book, the kind of bookend style or kind of house style, room style, I guess, is this this blue ink washy line drawings of this little room with a bookcase. But as you can see, looking at this page, as we enter these different books that the character is reading, we enter into the visual worlds of these various comics. So let's read through these next few pages. I'm going to need a manual or a guide to help me navigate this visual world. I've got to find a way to decode them. I need to learn their language. I come across what appears to be a selection of books of philosophy. Maybe they'll show me how comics work, even if they can't shed any light on my existential condition. If you take a minute to look at some of the titles there, you might see some familiar ones like Of Comicsology, slightly like Fractured Fairies, Fractured Philosophy Tales, Pluto's Retreat, A Comic of One's Own by Virginia Woolf, little picture of the author on the back, Critique of Pure Comics, How to Do Things with Comics, De Comicsum Natura, The Phenomenology of the Comic Book, and the one that our reader picks up called Tractatus Comico-Philosophicus. And they open the book, and this is what it looks like. I need to show you something remarkable. A comic book? Don't judge it by its cover. I've learned something life-changing in here. This I gotta see. A few minutes later, it's a humdinger, isn't it? Are you trying to tell me we're living in a comic book? That's what Dr. Martin's theory proposes. Going on to the next page here. That makes no sense. Look at me. Ain't I flesh and blood hound? I'm afraid his conclusion is inescapable. You are lions on paper, and so, alas, am I. Here's how the comics hypothesis works. Dr. Martin posits 3 possible scenarios. The first supposes that all civilizations go extinct before mastering the art of comics. Pooh-pooh. Anyone can make a comic if they want to. It's harder than it looks, old pal. It's harder than it looks. Now we change scene to another comic. A philosophizing cat, huh? But wait, it goes on. And they're reading a comic book called The Comics Hypothesis. Scenario 2 says that of all civilizations that develop the capability to master comics, none are inclined to do so. What? And go through life without kooky critter Sunday pages? No, thank you. I'm afraid you're right. And that's precisely what's so troubling, because it leads to the third and final scenario, which states that given the capability, a non-negligible number of these civilizations will master comics. Well, if that's true, there would be a proliferation of comics throughout all dimensions and times. Yes, so many so that there would necessarily be far more comic book characters in the universe than there are cartoonists. The next page, making it almost certain that we ourselves are characters in a comic book and not original cartoonists. You mean to say that right now I'm breathing printer's ink instead of factory air? That I'm drawn by some hack wearing a visor, guzzling rye and rushing to hit a deadline? Phooey. And here we kind of zoom out again back to the bookshelf where the reader is looking through these things. Suddenly I feel weirdly exposed inside my little room. I imagine a cosmic cartoonist plotting my next pratfall. There we go.
All right, so good. Now, I'm not going to comment on that. I think the reading span stands for itself. I will say that I generally use those pages to show off the book.
Okay, interesting.
Because they're multiple styles in a row.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge aspect to like quickly give someone an idea. But there's also the concept of the narrative flow going across multiple styles, which is accessible there.
Right.
It gets more challenging later.
Yeah, it gets a bit more crazy as it goes along. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sets it up for them how it works. But now I want to get right down to the color blue.
Okay.
The color blue.
Yeah, go ahead. Lead with the question.
Yeah, I just it has become the stand-in color of the serious graphic novel.
Mm.
You know, I'm waiting for Pantheon to re-release Mouse, Blue Tinge,
Blue Tinge,
Matches, all their other great releases.
Mm-hmm.
Where did this come from, and why did you choose it to be your standard color of the main reality of the book?
Functionally, I was looking for something kind of neutral and cool that would be sort of a visual anchor throughout the book, especially because I knew I was going to be doing pretty far out zany stuff with like sort of Hanna-Barbera colors, and there's like a sort of Tales from the Crypt riff at one point. So there's a lot of shifting colors and shapes and drawing styles, and black and white stuff too, because there's like a sort of Go Nagai early Tezuka manga sequence that is purely black and white. Yeah.
The first thing he picks up, I think, is also black and white.
Right. There's the Man Who Forgot Time, the sort of imaginary short story. So I couldn't just do black and white because there's black and white stories in the fiction that I wanted to differentiate pretty clearly from the blue. And it's fine. I've been trying to think, I feel like there was one particular comic that I was looking at that made me think about the blue. Because I did try some early studies that were like, I tried watercolors, doing just doing full color and just trying to do a muted palette. But I found it was too busy and it would have taken forever too, frankly. There's definitely like a practical level that if I could just find a single tone that makes the action fall into the background. But I'm sorry, I can't remember. But I'm definitely aware of it being like, you think about,
we just got a comment that said Ghost World is blue change.
Yeah, Ghost World for sure. Although Ghost World is a bit more acidic, kind of turquoise blue.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say Ghost World, I'd say has more of a pop to it. Definitely, definitely, I can say off the top of my head, the easy one of recent memory is the Sculptor. Sculptor is exactly that blue tone. You're right.
I didn't see that till after I'd already started working on that. But you're right. That's a very similar tone.
There's a few others.
There's a lot of European stuff that uses like a single tone like that, and I feel like maybe GP, who's done stuff for First Second,
I'm like blanking on his name. 3,000 kilometers a second, and
Manuele Fiore.
Yeah.
He does a Fiore. Yeah.
Fiore?
I think it's Fiore. I think there's no E on there.
Yeah,
no E on Manuele, but then it's Fiore, F-I-O-R, I believe.
James Romberger, sorry. Just someone just
Uncivilized author.
Yeah.
Was there a blue tone on that? The cover's blue.
I'm not sure, but I think I think James Strums knew that later one, the Marriage Falling Apart one.
I
believe
for sure. Yeah. But I think to get back to why that is, you're implying a little bit but cheekily that it's like it kind of like connotes a certain quality or something like that. And there
with
could be
all
a bit
the
of
other coloring choices, I felt like maybe
right. But I think maybe it has a bit of black and white film kind of feel to it, but it's like more vibrant than just doing the grayscale, because I would have been the option to just do like ink wash, black and white. But I figured I'm doing this whole book in color. I want to, use that. This is my first book in color. I've done various short single pages and things like that over the years, but this is really a chance to play around with that. I'm sorry I didn't. There's definitely like one particular book that I was looking at. I was like, yeah, that's basically the kind of blue I wanted to go with. So
that's going to drive me crazy. I don't know which one it is, but I know, and I definitely I know. I was word ballooned or something with Scott McCloud when that came out, and they said, "Are you putting your hat in the ring or something for the blue is serious graphic novels?" And he goes, "I don't even know what you're talking about." The book is so busy and there's so much happening. I didn't want too many colors.
Yeah,
and I was just like, and it feels like it's become this thing that it's graphic novel, maybe because it's practical, maybe because it works really well when you're going to have other colors show up. It definitely allows for really subtle shading that you can play with while it's still like a black and white shading. It's still not distracting you and trying to be too three-dimensional.
Right. I mean, I was, again, just I look for simplicity wherever I can. And some of these pages actually started out more busy, like with more line in them, and using an ink wash. And so it's a combination of ink wash and actually flat colors in Photoshop that I can tint. Right. For that. Exactly. So it gives me a lot of versatility there while keeping it pretty simple and pretty like continuous. So like that page you just showed, I wasn't sure whether to leave that in the blue tone or make all those colors, because it's like, 2 pages of different comics. And I stuck with the blue there because it's like page 5 of the book or something. So I didn't want to like throw people right into this. Like I wanted to establish this rhythm of like, this is the reality of this book, is this kind of blue tone world. And also like introduce these different visual styles within that world first. And then later on, you have especially when you get the sequence I just read, the comics hypothesis, you really get lots of different styles and bright colors coming at you.
And I think again, there's definitely such a narrative flow to this that allows you to do all those things. And again, it comes off effortlessly. How much was this book, like Slaughterhouse-Five? Were you at one point writing it on a wall in crayon lines and figuring out what intersects where, or was it just like basically this is how it was imagined and it came out?
It's pretty close to how I imagined it. I was talking to Tom and Gina at Partners and Son, which is a shop here in Philadelphia where I'm going to have an art show later this week, actually, December 2nd to December 12th, if you're watching this live. So it was opportunity for me to like dig through all my boxes of art stuff. I have a big box with all of my Ex Libris stuff. And I found a note from 2006 that had an outline written down of the whole book. And I was surprised how close, and I haven't read it point for point, but the basic idea and structure of it and the concept of how it was going to work and the sort of narrative journey that the reader goes through, which I won't say too much about, but there isn't a real story going on. At the same time, there's all this like play with the form and with the history and language of comics. All that stuff was in there pretty early on. I did some fairly important resequencing of the main stories in the course of the book. There's a key story that's now in the last chapter that was actually earlier in the book before. And it didn't sit right. And when I figured out where to put it in the last chapter, it actually really locked the whole book into place. La Mulata de Córdoba is the name of the story.
I was wondering if it was that one.
So definitely like there are pieces that like the puzzle wasn't entirely worked out. But I'm someone who likes to have a pretty good map. I know there are artists who like to sort of make it up as they go along, or like feel like it's too tedious to like work out a whole outline and script and then just draw it for 5 years or 10 years or whatever, because it is tedious and it's very long, slow work. But I do like having a pretty good idea of where it's going. The place it gets really most difficult for me is just refining the writing. Like that was something, the narration, the voice of the narrator is something that I really worked hard on. And the thing I got the most feedback from other readers, from Jessica, from Tom, and also from Tom Hart and a couple other cartoonist friends that read like pretty finished versions of the book and gave me some really good feedback that helped me just like bring that home in a way that I feel like I feel very happy with. Oh,
I mean, again, it's pretty clear that I'm a big fan of the book, but the passive voice, some of the word choices that if the character had been written slightly more aware would be too self-aware for little comic related humor almost.
Right.
But
right.
You made this character someone so, and I feel like this doesn't get too much away, so lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
yeah, exactly. I mean, for the character to have any kind of interesting arc, they had to be a little bit ignorant, and the trick, and also just for me to be able to do the stuff I wanted to do with comics and have them go through a process of discovery and learning. And the trick I felt like, or one of the tricks, was to do that without being condescending to that reader. And by extension, anyone who reads the book. Like I want them there. I feel like they're treated as like an intelligent character, but who's lost in ways that are making like even obvious stuff sometimes escape their notice.
I mean, you get the poor character ridiculously drunk at a page turn. It's not really. It's kind of mean of you.
Yeah, I stacked the cards against them in various points. Yeah.
On that note, that's something that I found that it's a modern sensibility, but the other party in Calvino, Ludmila's part, the other person that you're creating a reality of, never gets a pronoun or a name.
Right.
The narrative never gets one, and it's really I feel like that again is something that had to have been balanced. There's moments where you have to really think about it, but it doesn't come off that way. It doesn't come off as, oh, I see what you're doing here.
Right. I'm glad because that was definitely a real balancing act in the narration and really in the whole structure of the book, to have these characters be non-gender determinant. which didn't start as a political gesture on my part. It was really a creative challenge.
Yeah, no.
But I did, a book that influenced me a lot with that was, the Oulipo, which is this French literary group that's been a big influence on me, and that Calvino was actually a member of, although mostly they're French. One of their female members is named Anne Garreta, and she wrote a book called Sphinx, which was actually translated into English in the last couple of years. I recommend it. The same title, Sphinx, and it's kind of a torrid love story of an affair that lasts over several years between two characters, and she never uses pronouns the whole time. There, you read it as like expecting you're going to be reading a lesbian romance, but the fact is you're never really quite sure who the narrator is and who the other character is, and it lends this kind of like openness and sense of uncertainty to the whole narrative that's really interesting and really engaging.
Well, I find with comics, again, I noticed maybe because when we redesigned our card and put a comic on the back, and my biggest goal when I spoke to the artist to do it was, this is why I don't make comics, because like this was 8 panels and I had like zillions of notes that they had to do right. Was that they were basically like, I named them NB and CD, like for non-binary and crash test dummy. They have to be the simplest character that anyone looking at is going to go, oh, that's me shopping at the store. And that's an important aspect of any comic creation, is that connection that you're going to build, and every time you put a detail in, you're going against that connection. So I think that again is a balancing act that without thought, it's almost not noticeable that you're doing, but with thought is very impressive. So I'm clapping here.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear you.
And then the last one I'm going to do before we take Q&A for other people, because my questions are kind of tedious. It comes from what you just said. The original was 2006. So again, as this very much is an education and everything, not everything, but a lot that you can do with comics and comic styles. Was this inspired by teaching, by the role of creating textbooks and course loads and teaching comics?
It was certainly informed by all that, but like I said, that outline was from 2006, and it was actually pretty well developed. So I haven't found like my earliest note where I came up with the idea, but it actually probably predates teaching. It probably comes from the original kernel of this idea. I'm a very slow worker. Like I get an idea and it takes me years to get it to the point where it's ready to, work on. So I think I probably came up with it actually in the late 90s, before I was teaching comics, when I was still working on my earliest, graphic novels on Black Candy and Odds Off, just starting to work on 99 Ways to Tell a Story, which is, a similar work, and that uses a lot of different styles. Yeah, that definitely informed, and like the fun I was having playing with different drawing styles and modes of storytelling was something I definitely knew as soon as I started. Really, when I first read the book by Raymond Queneau, that was the inspiration for 99 Ways to Tell a Story, and that was in 1992 or so. I knew that this is what I want to do. This is something I really want to investigate deeply, playing around with different styles, different points of view. And at some point in there, I read Calvino's novel, and it wasn't as direct. Like when I read Queneau, The Exercise in Style, which is a book of one very short text retold 99 times in different styles and points of view, that I'd read like 5 of them, and I was like, oh my God, I want to do this in comics. It was a really direct inspiration. Calvino, I read some point later, along with a lot of other, playful experimental literature, and also, comic books, like seeing like Winsor McKay, and like the Coco the Clown, the sort of, or not that one, but the what's the ink blot one, the Fleischer Brothers comic, where it's like the character, the ink
jumps through the
inkwell. Harvey Kurtzman's kids comics and stuff that are very meta and stuff. So all these things were like, bubbling around. And at some point I had that idea that was more or less, again, it'd be interesting to go back and see if I could find the chain of thoughts that led from Calvino to the book. So so your question, it's more the other way around, that this was already approach to comics that I was getting really deeply involved with. And so that when I started teaching, that was a way to just kind of work on those ideas further by teaching them to students and trying to, codify my ideas about drawing styles and page layout and genre and how all these things are the plastic tools of comics. It is very much narrative and storytelling, but it's also all these other visual and design aspects that create meaning and create narrative in comics that make it such an amazing art form.
I mean, absolutely. One of the honors I had during COVID was we had a cover designed for a special project with Bayuko Shimizu, who also teaches at SVA and teaches design. Okay. And we don't do variant covers and things and it's happened once in a blue moon, but we've never gone all out. We got a full on internationally acclaimed illustrator. And the amount of work that went into it and thought, really, it was done across multiple shops, and there were a few people who were really like, "This it's just a cover." they're like, I mean, I'm really happy that we're having all these questions. We're doing colors and we're flipping, and I was like, but that's what an illustration job is, and that's what a comic book is. That's like what. There's all this thought, and there's all these steps, and there's all these things. Yeah. And I appreciate. I have students of yours pass through here, comic creators, or Josh Hickson. I don't know if you.
Oh, sure, yeah. SVA years past, yeah. Yeah,
Josh is actually January has a book coming out that was created here. A customer of mine hired Josh to do the original self-publish, and now Dark Horse is putting it out. So, and their approach to comics, no matter what kind of comics they make, is just it's so much more in conversation with the medium than just telling a story through comics. And I really I said this to hype the thing up, but I really was thinking about it the other day. You and Jessica really have this humongous footprint and influence with these younger creators, because even if they don't all go on to become the next big thing or huge influence to other people, their work is being seen by other people who see that work and see the way they approach. I've heard literal conversations Josh has had with people as this young, scrappy creator, and the approach and the way he delineates how he made his decisions and what he does. I see. I mean, again, I've read the textbooks, and I see both you and Jessica's approach and the approach of the school there. But it's not just Josh. There's also people who are younger than him who have had mentors or people talk to them who went through that or who were peers of yours. And I feel like a huge aspect of this growth in the medium and growth in quality in comics has come from taking it this seriously and looking at it that way. So I'm just here as someone who sells these things that just keep getting better and better and more diverse and a wider range of stuff, to say thank you and ask you to pass that on to Jessica as well.
Thank you. I'll tell her. Yeah. I mean, we were lucky to come of age, first of all, at a time when we were far from the first generation, but that when Jessica and I came of age in the 90s, there was a very vibrant, much smaller scene where you go to a comic book store, and I could leave every week. I could go to the comic book store and leave with sometimes only 3 or 4 comics, but that was like everything that come out that week that I wanted to read. That was from Fantagraphics or Drawn and Quarterly, or like the 1 or 2 mainstream titles I might follow. And by the same token, when we started publishing, we had a very high visibility, because there just was not that many people out there. And over the years, comics have gotten become such a bigger world, and manga's entered it, and the YA scene has become so huge. And a lot of that we were able to just kind of, come along with and encourage into existence in our, the 11 years we were teaching at SVA and doing the textbooks and stuff like that. But it's been pretty amazing to watch the growth happen over time and continue. I think Tom's trying to get a word in here. Did you want to jump in?
Publisher man.
Sure. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to reiterate that we can take questions now. So if anybody in the audience wants to throw something out there, I'll lead. I do have one question that I would like to ask. I love the various stylistic references to different comics, different genres, different different eras of comics. And you kind of talked about that a little bit, but I'm curious about how personal were the choices, or was there a lot of like, I kind of want to say this kind of thing in this particular moment, so I'm going to grab a specific kind of comic, a specific kind of genre, a specific kind of reference here that will kind of match that tone? Or was it a lot more personal where you're like, I want to make sure, that we have some EC in here. I want to make sure that we have something specific that you really loved reading as a reader?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think more the former, that I would I had certain stories that I wanted, certain types of stories that I wanted to tell, and certain kind of meta-fictional things I wanted to happen, of slipping from one world into another, or some kind of fiction becoming reality within a comic. And I largely let those determine the drawing style. So to do a horror comic, it was obvious to go with a Tales from the Crypt kind of style. And in other places, I would look for sort of visual variety. Like in the sequence that I read, I was kind of like flipping through books because I knew I wanted to fit as many different comics eras and genres and styles as I could. So we start with kind of it's sort of like a Crockett or Otto Saglo, I guess, or Crockett Johnson mid-century modernist simple cartooning style, the two men talking in the street, sort of blobby men. And then I wanted to get some real contrast. I was like, what's the opposite of that? And it was like, I came up with sort of, this Hanna-Barbera riffing on the kind of Deputy Dog and that kind of stuff. I called them whatever, they're Huckleberry Hound, and I forget the cat's name, but, and then from that to go into like a sort of kind of modern YA, vaguely Raina Telgemeier-esque kind of style. And then like at the end of that sequence, there's the kind of worker, outside the factory. And I really I was looking for contrast there, and I'm trying to think. In that case, I was just like, I don't really know what to do here. I did have like a list of like, I want to click this box. I want to get like, these different kinds of styles. And I wish I didn't do all of it, but for that particular moment, for whatever reason, I decided I wanted to try and do this like imaginary proletarian kind of Soviet comic that might have existed at some point, and more or less made that one up whole cloth, So yeah, it's more stuff that fed the story, and where the styles, like a kind of old sort of vintage manga style, is going to add additional, information and kind of connotations to the story, more than just me putting in a sort of a gallery of my favorite drawing styles in there. Because there are a lot of stuff that styles that I like that I didn't include in there. And I guess they tend to be styles that are recognizable to the general comics reader. I didn't want to do like, well, here I'm going to do like a Munoz and Sampaio page followed by like, some obscure artists that I like from Weirdo, that no one reads anymore, So I wanted to keep it on a sort of playing field where there's sort of echoes of familiar stuff, to make it, partly because it's all made up, to make it a plausible comics universe that I'm creating.
That's cool. All right. Any other questions?
Quiet audience.
Yeah, it is. Any questions any more questions from the panelists? We're getting kind of close to the official end time here. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out.
You're a customer of mine. I will say this. This is your own fault for not picking up the book earlier, as I've been telling you to for the 2 weeks we've had it, because you look foolish now. So you should really come back here. And when it's on YouTube, you can put in a question and maybe Matt will answer it, but you should have read it already. For those of you who haven't read it yet and are hearing all this and going, oh, that does sound interesting, tell me to put it aside for you. If you don't shop by me, there are many wonderful shops all over the country who, even if they don't have it, can get it for you. So you should definitely be getting this book. Bookshop.org. If you live in the hinterlands and can't get anywhere, and a percentage of it will go to an independent bookstore. Uncivilized itself has a website directly where you can buy the book, so no excuses.
And I understand you have a few of my exclusive art prints.
Yes, I wanted to show everyone we have these prints, and Escape Pod has a bunch as well, and we'll be including them with the orders. So there's a link for the Escape Pod shop in the chat. So if you get it there, you'll get a little print signed by Matt.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a very nice thing. I actually used to have something signed by Matt up from when I invited he and Jessica to come to the store when I opened it.
That's right. Yeah. Now, this has been a long dialogue.
Yeah, imagine if it wasn't a pandemic, it might even be in the store.
All right. Well, I don't know. I guess this is probably it. We're hitting the last couple of minutes here.
I think I feel like I'm feeling good about it. I think we had a pretty good chat here. We don't need
any final questions, final words to kind of close us out here.
Anyone? I will thank you both, Thomas, just all the wonderful stuff you publish, hosting this, putting this together. That's not a question, Kevin. Thank you, though. Thank you for joining
Compliments accepted, even if they're not questions. Hi, Kevin. Thanks for coming, Kevin. That's the only name I see on here. So. And Adam, yeah. I don't know Chris Catterson, but hi. I'm looking at the visitors here, but
yeah, I recognized a few of the names. But thank you, Thomas, for publishing, for Uncivilized, for publishing all these wonderful books. Matt, I already thanked you for a lot of things that were probably a bit much, but I really do appreciate.
It was a bit heavy, but I can take it.
I just, I grew up in the 90s as well, and I got lost and caught up at a young age in the superhero stuff because it was blowing up at the time.
Yeah.
I missed a lot of truly quality stuff that was coming out, not through any malicious intent by anybody, but because comics were being made that were exceptional, but they just weren't. They weren't readily available. By the late 90s, of course, I knew all the big underground names and I had tracked them down. But
right, let's not forget that before the internet, you really had to search these things out. You had to find the one shop, if you were lucky, that would sell this stuff, or you had to have a friend who would turn you onto it and tell you which authors to order through the mail.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that one of the major goals we have in the shop with our stolen Friends of Lou, the catchphrase that comics are for everyone, is I always tell people, like, we're just trying to touch on the breadth of what's out there. We're just trying to get you an idea that there's so much more than you can even comprehend that is a comic book that tells these stories. And I think Ex Libris is a stellar example of such a thing, because it shows within itself how much comics are up for, and comics can do, and comics do regularly. So again, just you gave me a market of comic creators making amazing stuff as an educator, and then you gave me this amazing book to do it. 14 years or so, you'll have another book for me to sell.
Hopefully sooner than that.
But really, thank you for coming in. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, this is the good word to end on. Thank you, everyone. And
bye, everyone. Thanks a lot.